The room went quiet the moment the words slipped from her lips, sharp, cold, and cutting. "She's just after your money. Poor girls always are." Her voice was laced with disdain, her eyes locked on the young woman across the table. Everyone froze. No one dared speak. But then, the butler stepped aside, and in walked a man in a tailored navy suit, radiating power with eyes that could silence storms. He placed a hand gently on the girl's shoulder, and what he said next turned the insult into a moment this family would never forget. Dear audience, if this new story theme has your attention, please click like button to keep the stories flowing. Sophie had never seen herself as someone who belonged in marble foyers or under sparkling chandeliers. She grew up in a modest two-bedroom apartment above her parents' bakery, the scent of fresh bread filling her mornings, the hum of ovens forming the soundtrack of her life. Her world was built on community, kindness, and hard work. She believed in earning everything she had, and never needing to prove her worth. When she met Daniel in college, it wasn't love at first sight. It was friendship, mutual respect. Late-night study sessions turned into early morning walks. Over time, love grew, not out of convenience or infatuation, but from shared values and quiet moments that built a life together. Daniel's world, however, was different. Raised in old money, he came from a family with generational wealth and a legacy written into city buildings and university walls. His mother, Eleanor, was the embodiment of high society, poised, powerful, and utterly obsessed with status. And, while Daniel had long distanced himself from that world, he couldn't avoid it forever. After graduation, Daniel proposed. Sophie said yes, not because he came from money, but because he didn't let it define him. When he invited her to meet his family, she was nervous but hopeful. She wore her best dress, brought a box of her parents' famous almond croissants, and carried herself with the quiet confidence of a woman who knew who she was. But from the moment she stepped into the grand estate, the air shifted. Eleanor didn't smile. She didn't welcome. She measured, and what Sophie didn't know was that before dessert was even served, she would be humiliated in a way that would shatter the evening and reveal a truth no one saw coming. The dinner table stretched far longer than it needed to. Eleanor sat at the head, silverware gleaming beside her untouched plate. Sophie, seated to Daniel's right, felt the cold eyes of his mother scanning every inch of her presence, like she was being evaluated. In an auction rather than introduced into a family, small talk flowed like icy water. Daniel tried to bridge the distance, telling stories from college, praising Sophie's work at a local non-profit, laughing a little too loudly at nothing. But Eleanor's responses were clipped, polite on the surface, and laced with quiet judgment. "So, Sophie," Eleanor finally said, swirling her wine, "what exactly do you do? Charity work, is it?" The question wasn't curious. It was surgical. Sophie smiled. "Yes, I run a youth leadership program, helping underprivileged teens gain access to scholarships and mentorships." Eleanor replied. "Noble, though I imagine it doesn't pay well." The words stung, but Sophie kept her composure. Then came the subtle jabs. "You must find all this a bit overwhelming. These dinners, the expectations. Do your parents own their bakery or do they rent? I suppose you don't travel often. Daniel grew up skiing in Switzerland." Every line is a reminder. "You don't belong." Sophie glanced at Daniel, who looked more and more uncomfortable, but he said nothing, perhaps out of fear, perhaps out of habit. The final blow came with dessert. The butler brought in trays of sweets, including the almond croissants Sophie had gifted earlier. Eleanor reached for one, examined it, and placed it back on the tray. Then, with a sly smile, she turned to Daniel. "Darling, I just want you to be careful. Girls like this," she gestured, not even looking at Sophie, "they're drawn to money. Poverty teaches hunger." Silence. The kind that slices. Sophie's breath caught in her throat. Humiliated. Exposed. Like her worth had just been publicly auctioned and declared void. And then, like fate had a sense of drama, the butler returned. "Sir," he announced, "your guest has arrived." A man walked in, tall, confident, in a dark-tailored suit with polished shoes that tapped softly on the marble floor. His skin bore the deep hue of long summers and quiet strength. He was black, unapologetically so, and his presence shifted the energy in the room like a storm had just opened the front door. He stopped beside Sophie. I placed a hand on her shoulder and smiled, not at Eleanor, but at Sophie. "Ready to go, sweetheart?" Before anyone could process who he was, Eleanor straightened in her chair, her tone sharpening. "Excuse me, who are you?" The man turned slowly. "Oh, I'm just Sophie's father." Her mouth parted slightly, but no sound came. He continued calmly. "Robert Chenier, CEO of Haven Equity. I believe we just acquired Ashbury Holdings last quarter. That was your husband's firm, correct?" A pin could have dropped. No one moved. Eleanor's breath hitched. She knew that name. Everyone in the room did. Haven Equity was a giant, a multinational empire built from scratch. And Robert Chenier wasn't just wealthy. He was a billionaire and wealthy, respected, powerful, and yes, black. He looked around, his voice smooth and firm. "I just came to pick up my daughter. Thought I'd see how she was being treated." He paused. "Seems I came right on time." Sophie stood slowly, her face still calm but her eyes blazing with pride. Daniel rose too, speechless. Helena, frozen, could only watch as the woman she called poor walked out with a man who could buy her entire estate 3 times over. And then Robert turned back one last time. "You know, Eleanor," he said softly, "where I come from, class isn't measured by wealth. It's measured by how you treat people with none." And with that he left, leaving behind a silence deeper than insult. Dear audience, where are you watching from? Drop your city name in the comments. Outside, the air was quiet, cooler, more real. Sophie didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't need to. She had stood in the fire and she hadn't melted. She had risen. In the weeks that followed, Daniel apologized more deeply than ever before. He confronted his mother and told her she was wrong, not just about Sophie, but about what she thought mattered in life. He started showing up differently, more aware, more present. He stood beside Sophie, not to shield her, but to lift her voice louder. As for Eleanor, her world didn't crumble, but it cracked. The dinner went unspoken, but the silence said enough. Sophie never returned to that estate. She didn't need to. She had nothing to prove. What stayed with her wasn't the insult, but the power of the moment. She realized she never needed validation from people who built walls out of pride. Her father had taught her that, not with wealth, but with dignity. Because racism isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a whisper in a room full of silverware. A look, a question, a smirk, but dignity. That's louder. And in a world where people are still judged by the zip code they come from, by the color of their skin, or by who their parents are, maybe stories like this can shift something, even if only a little. Because real wealth isn't in dollars, it's in how we treat each other when no one's watching. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories and fresh videos.